Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission, well, it's pretty simple. Cut through all the noise, find the gems, and basically give you a shortcut to being really well informed. Today, we're diving into React development. Specifically, we're looking at this great article, 17 React hooks that power 90% of modern components.
Yep.
Our goal here is to figure out which hooks are really essential. You know, the built-in ones, the external ones you actually end up using day to day.
Exactly. Because let's face it, whether you're new to React or you've been doing it for years, there are just so many tools out there. It can be overwhelming. This deep dive is about nailing down those fundamental patterns, the ones that help you avoid just copying logic everywhere or making things way too complex. It's not just knowing the hooks, it's understanding why they help you write cleaner, more efficient React apps. Saves a lot of headaches down the line.
Okay, sounds good. Let's unpack this then. Maybe start with the basics, the hooks that are actually built right into React itself, the ones you kind of have to know. First up, I guess it has to be useState. You see it everywhere. It's the go-to first state that changes, right? Makes things dynamic.
Oh, absolutely unavoidable. If you need a component to remember something, some data that changes over time and affects the UI, useState is your starting point. Simple, fundamental. But then, sometimes state gets a bit tangled. Maybe you have several pieces of state that change together.
Yeah, like in a complex form or something.
Exactly. That's where useReducer really shines. It gives you a more structured approach, especially when the next state depends on the previous one. And it works really nicely with useContext for managing state more globally. You just dispatch these simple action objects. Makes updates cleaner.
Ah, useContext. Now that rings a bell. Isn't that the one that saves you from, what's it called, prop drilling?
Yes. Prop drilling. Ugh.
Nice
Such a
stuff.
pain. When you have to pass a prop down through component after component after component just to get it where it needs to go.
You've been there. It gets messy fast.
Totally. useContext just lets you skip all that. You create a context, provide a value way up high in the component tree, and then any component deep down can just grab it. Perfect for things like, the current user's info or the theme settings.
Yeah.
Makes global-ish data way easier to handle without passing props manually everywhere.
Okay, next one. useEffect. This one's interesting because the article and lots of folks online say you should avoid it 99% of the time.
Right.
That sounds extreme. Like, why is it even on the essential list if we're supposed to avoid it? What's the real deal?
Yeah, that's a common point of confusion. The warning is really about misusing it. Right. People sometimes reach for useEffect for things that aren't really side effects, like trying to derive state or over-optimizing things that React handles fine. But for its actual purpose, syncing your component with something outside the React system, it's absolutely essential.
Outside? Like what?
Like fetching data from an API when the component first loads, or setting up, say, a subscription to a WebSocket, or even directly interacting with the DOM sometimes, maybe for a third-party library. A really simple example is using it to update the browser tab's title based on component state. That's an interaction with the browser's API outside React. So you need useEffect for that kind of side effect.
Gotcha. So it's not bad. You just need to know when it's the right tool.
Precisely. Think, am I interacting with something external? If yes, useEffect might be your friend. If not, maybe there's a simpler way.
That clears things up. Now, you mentioned interacting with the DOM. React always tells you don't touch the DOM directly, but sometimes you have to, right? Like with chart libraries or older code.
Yeah, exactly. That's the classic exception. And when you do need that direct DOM access, useRef is the safe, React-approved way to do it. It gives you a stable reference to a DOM node, or even just a mutable value that persists across renders without causing a re-render itself. So for integrating something like a D3 chart or a canvas animation library that needs to draw directly onto an element, useRef lets you grab that element safely. The example chart in the source is a good illustration.
Okay, so it's like a controlled escape hatch for those specific DOM needs.
Perfect way to put it.
All right, moving on to performance. useMemo and useCallback. The article notes they might become less critical eventually, maybe with the new compiler, but they're still super important now. What's the core idea? Just stopping things from re-rendering all the time?
Sort of, yeah. But it's a bit more nuanced. They're about memoization caching results. useMemo caches the result of an expensive calculation, so it doesn't have to rerun on every single render.
Like calculating a huge total from a list or something?
Exactly. If that calculation is slow and its inputs haven't changed, useMemo prevents redoing the work. It's also useful for keeping object or array references stable if you're passing them to components optimized with React.memo.
And useCallback. Similar idea.
Similar, but specifically for functions. It gives you back a memoized version of your callback function. This is really important when passing callbacks down to child's components, especially memoized ones. If you pass a new function instance every time, the child might re-render unnecessarily, even if its props haven't really changed. UseCallback prevents that by giving the child the same function instance between renders as long as its dependencies are the same, like a handle click function.
So they're tools for optimization, but you need to use them thoughtfully, not just everywhere.
Absolutely. Memoization has a small cost itself, so you only use them where there's a clear benefit, either a genuinely slow calculation or preventing unnecessary re-renders of downstream components.
Makes sense. Okay, one more built-in. useLayoutEffect. Sounds similar to useEffect, but the article says it's rare but powerful. What makes it different?
The timing. That's the key difference. useEffect runs after the browser has painted the screen. useLayoutEffect, on the other hand, runs synchronously right after React performs DOM mutations, but before the browser paints.
Before paint. Why would you need that?
It's crucial for tasks where you need to read layout information from the DOM and then potentially make changes based on that information without the user seeing an intermediate, possibly janky state. Think about measuring an element size to position a tooltip perfectly next to it. If you did that in useEffect, the user might see the tooltip flicker briefly in the wrong spot before it corrects. useLayoutEffect lets you measure and adjust before anything hits the screen.
Ah, okay. So very specific use cases, usually involving DOM measurements and immediate updates to prevent visual glitches.
Exactly. Very niche, but invaluable when you need it.
All right, that covers the core built-in hooks pretty well. Now let's shift gears a bit. The React ecosystem is huge, and there are some patterns, especially around data fetching, that have become almost standard practice, even if they aren't built into React itself. The article mentions useSWR and useQuery from TanStackQuery. These seem to pop up everywhere now for fetching data.
They really do. They've become the de facto standard for a reason. They handle so much complexity for you: caching, automatic refetching, error handling, loading states, things you'd otherwise have to build yourself, probably less effectively.
So they're like data fetching superpowers. How do they differ?
Broadly speaking, SWR, which stands for stale while revalidate, is often seen as a bit simpler, really elegant for common scenarios. TanStackQuery, formerly React Query, is maybe more powerful, more configurable, really good for complex data dependencies and mutations. Both generally work with a concept of a fetcher function. You just give them a key, like the API endpoint URL, and a function that actually knows how to fetch the data. Could be using fetch, Axios, whatever you like. They handle the rest.
Takes a lot of boilerplate off your plate.
A ton. Seriously improves the developer experience around data.
And sticking with state, but moving beyond the component level, sometimes useState and useReducer aren't enough for really big apps, right? When state needs to be shared everywhere.
Right. For complex global state management, that's when people reach for dedicated libraries.
Yeah.
And the hooks you use depend entirely on which library you pick. If you're using Redux with React Redux, you'll be using useSelector to read pieces of the state and useDispatch to send actions to update it.
Okay.
If you go with something like ZooStand or Jotai, you'll use different hooks like useStore or useAtom. The principle is similar, though. Managing state outside the component hierarchy for broader access and more predictable updates.
It's cool how the community builds these solutions on top of React's core. Now, let's get into some of those custom or external hooks that the article says are reached for in nearly every app. These sound super practical. It highlights useBoolean, calls it an all-time favorite. What's so great about managing a simple true-false?
It sounds trivial, but it just cleans things up so nicely.
Yeah.
Instead of writing sets visible true and sets visible false all the time, useBoolean typically gives you functions like set true, set false, and toggle.
Ah, like for a modal or a dropdown.
Exactly. The open-close form example is perfect. It's just cleaner. Less room for typos, more declarative. It's one of those small things that just makes your code feel tidier.
I can see that. Little quality of life improvements. What about other convenience hooks? It lists useCopyToClipboard, usePrevious, and useDebounce.
Yeah, these are real workhorses for common UI patterns. useCopyToClipboard self-explanatory, really. Makes adding a copy to clipboard button trivial, often handling success states for you too.
Super useful.
Definitely. Then usePrevious. This one is surprisingly handy. Lets you easily compare a prop or a state value from the previous render to the current one.
Why would you need the old value?
To react to changes. Maybe you want to trigger an animation only when a specific number increases, not just on every render, or log something when a status changes. The example count increased shows that perfectly. You need the previous value to know if it actually did increase.
Right, okay. Comparison logic.
Exactly. And useDebounce.
Yeah.
This one's crucial for performance, especially with user input. Imagine a search bar that fetches suggestions as the user types. You don't want to hit the ATI on every single keystroke.
No way, that would be way too many requests.
Right. useDebounce lets you delay calling a function, like your API fetch, until a certain amount of time has passed without it being called again. So you wait until the user pauses typing. Saves a lot of unnecessary network traffic and server load.
Okay, those three sound incredibly practical. What about hooks for layout and responsiveness? useMediaQuery, useResizeObserver, useLocalStorage.
Yeah, tackling common browser and environment interactions. useMediaQuery is great for responsive design. It lets your component know if a CSS media query,
Yeah.
like minwidth 7 to 6 EPX, matches.
So you could render a different layout for mobile versus desktop.
Precisely. Render a mobile nav or a desktop nav based on screen size directly within your component logic.
Yeah.
Super clean. useResizeObserver hooks into the ResizeObserver API. It lets you track the dimensions, width, and height of a specific element. Really useful if you have components whose layout depends on their container size, or if you're using virtualization libraries like React Window that need element dimensions.
Okay, getting element size dynamically.
And useLocalStorage is just a convenient wrapper around the browser's local storage API. Makes it super easy to persist simple data across browser sessions.
Like user preferences. A dark mode toggle, maybe?
Perfect example. The theme switch is classic. useLocalStorage handles reading the value initially and saving it back whenever it changes. Simple, effective persistence for client-side settings.
Nice. And finally, navigation. React Router is still huge, right?
Absolutely dominant in the React ecosystem for routing.
Right.
And its main hook for actually changing the route programmatically is useNavigate.
So instead of using a link component, you can just call a function.
Exactly. Inside an event handler or after some async operation finishes, you can just call, say, navigate dashboard or navigate months to go back. It's the imperative way to control navigation within your app logic.
Got it. Fundamental for single-page apps.
Totally. So yeah, looking back at this list, these 17 hooks, both built-in and common external ones, they really do cover a massive amount of ground. As the article suggests, mastering these gives you a really solid foundation for building pretty much anything in React. You start to see how they fit together, you pick your favorites, you build your own little toolkit. It makes development much smoother.
That is a powerful takeaway. You know, thinking about all these tools, it makes me reflect, how many times did I build some clunky workaround for something that one of these hooks just solves elegantly now? What about you? Is there a common coding challenge, maybe from earlier in your career, that you look back on now and think, wow, if only I'd had hook X back then, it would have been so much simpler?
Well, definitely. For me, it was probably managing complex asynchronous operations with lots of loading and error states before things like useSWR or TanStack query became mainstream. I remember writing so much boilerplate state management, loading, error, data, and manually handling refetching logic. It was tedious and error-prone.
Yeah.
Seeing how these libraries abstract all that away with the simple hooks was a real game changer. Just lets you focus on the important parts.
Yeah, removing all that boilerplate really lets you focus. It's amazing how these abstractions simplify things. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into these essential React hooks. We really hope this gives you a clearer picture and makes you feel more confident diving into your next React project. Keep exploring, keep learning, and build something awesome.